To live in a where culture surrounds us, the number and variety of sculptures make Waupun extremely unique. Come along as we dive deep into the history of our town and discover little known facts about how and why our city became known as the City of Sculpture. So my name is Tracy Nichols. I volunteer here at the Historical Society. I'm currently the board secretary, and I love to dig up little known facts about our town. You can stop by the museum and say hi to me most Wednesdays from 3:30 to 7. We're always looking for new people interested in volunteering that have a love for our town and all of its history.
Hi, and I'm Jeannie Lujak. I also volunteer at the Waupun Historical Society. I too enjoy researching and I like doing these presentations. I am also an actor for the annual Halloween Cemetery Walk. My most current character, I played Blanche Shaler, which we will hear more about her in this presentation.
Okay, who knows these men? Each man here played an integral part in bringing the sculptures to Waupun. These men were the founding fathers of the sculpture movement in Waupun. On the left, we have Lorado Taft, the sculptor of the recording angel. On the right, James Earl Fraser, sculptor of the End of the Trail. In front and center, we have Clarence Addison Shaler, a wealthy Waupun industrialist, inventor, philanthropist, and sculptor of the Doan Fawn, the Citadel, She Who Sews, Diogenes, The Pioneers, Abraham Lincoln, The Morning of Life, Genesis, and The Dawn of Day.
Laredo Taft. Laredo Taft was born in Elmwood, Illinois on April 29, 1860. He grew up in Champaign, Illinois. While working in the new art museum there, 14-year-old Laredo decided to become a sculptor. Taft attended and graduated from the University of Illinois in Champaign from 1880 to 1883. He also studied abroad in Paris, France. In 1896, he married Ada Bartlett, by whom he had 3 daughters. To support his family, he taught at the Art Institute of Chicago until 1929. In addition to working in clay and plaster, Taft taught his students marble carving and had them work on group projects. He also lectured at the University of Chicago and the University of Illinois. He authored 2 books on sculpting. His 1903 book, The History of American Sculpture, was the first survey of the subject and stood for decades as a standard reference for sculpting. He has also been credited with helping to advance the status of women as sculptors. For example, in 1892, while the art community of Chicago was preparing for the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, Chief Architect Daniel Burnham expressed concern to Taft that the sculptural adornments to the buildings might not be finished on time. Taft asked him if he could employ some of his female students for the horticultural buildings. It was not socially accepted for women to work as sculptors at that time, so this was a risky request from Taft. Burnham responded, "Hire anyone, even white rabbits, if they'll do the work." From that arose a group of talented women sculptors known as the White Rabbits. Although Taft had made 2 decorative panels for the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago, the subsequent Depression delayed further commissions. On his own and in freer style than in earlier efforts, he produced The Solitude of the Soul in 1901. which won 2 medals and was bought by the Chicago Art Institute. He is most famous for the Fountain of the Great Lakes and the Fountain of Time in Chicago. The Fountain of the Great Lakes of 1913 was commissioned by the Ferguson Fund. In this fountain, the water falls from 5 great shells, repeats the flowing lines of the symbolic figures that holds the shells. For Seattle, Washington, he made a giant statue of George Washington with sheath sword and austere silhouette. That year, 1908, he won a competition for a commemorative fountain to Columbus for Union Station Plaza in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Thus, Laredo Taft became one of America's foremost sculptors. So what does Laredo Taft have to do with Waupun, Wisconsin? Clarence Shaler is well known in Waupun as a great inventor, but how did this industrial leader become interested in sculpture too? Mr. Shaler had many health problems and sought treatment in Chicago, where he came upon the studio of Laredo Taft. The two bonded over their love of sculpture and became lifelong friends. Clarence Addison Shaler was a wealthy industrialist, inventor, sculptor, and philanthropist. Shaler was born and raised in Mackford Prairie, Wisconsin. His first invention at the age of 9 was a cat, yes, as in feeling, powered treadmill to churn butter. Shortly after, young Shaler broke his leg in a farming accident and walked with a limp for the rest of his life. As a child of white settlers, Shaler grew up playing with the Native American children who lived nearby. His family shared meals and stories with them. In desperate times, his mother would open their home to entire families of Native Americans after their crops had been burned and they had been driven off their land with nowhere else to go. This made a big impact on Clarence Shaler. He always remembered his mother's kindness and empathy for the Native people's plight. This too influenced his sculptures. At 14, the Shalers moved to Ripon, Wisconsin, so Clarence and his twin sister Clara could attend prep school at Ripon College, which they did from 1874 to 1877. Clara died at their home in 1878, a terrible memory Clarence carried the rest of his life, and which was later to become the inspiration of one of his finest pieces of sculpture, The Morning of Life, which we will explore in part 2 of this presentation. Shaler's transition from educated farmer to manufacturing mogul began with an investment partnership in a flax mill. The mill soon failed, and the investors, now left with an empty building, decided they would use the facility to manufacture a different product. Some of the investor ideas included washboards and butter tubs. But then Clarence Shaler suggested umbrellas. You see, this was decades before synthetic materials, and the cotton covers became rotten from the rain's dampness. Shaler had conceived the idea of a detachable covering so that the umbrella top could easily be replaced when worn out. He produced a patented appliance for their manufacture. This business would become the Shaler Heart-Drink Company, later known as the Shaler Umbrella Company. While the umbrella business was growing, Shaler's health was beginning to deteriorate. He was plagued with stomach problems and spent many years searching for a cure. Finally, discovering the prime cause of his troubles was a leg that he had broken in the childhood farming accident had healed poorly, putting pressure on his nervous system. It was during this period of illness that Shaler was in Chicago seeking medical treatment that he wandered into the art studio of Laredo Taft. The two men struck up an instant friendship and remained close for the rest of their lives. When Clarence Shaler's beloved wife, Blanche Bancroft Shaler, died unexpectedly, Shaler turned to Taft to create this historic statue, the Recording Angel, as a memorial to her. The piece shows extreme detail and depicts a serene angel who has just completed reading the record of a good life. Notice the facial expression of the angel on the picture on the right. The bronze figure was chemically treated to age the metal to a gray-green tint found in ancient bronze. The statue is 9 feet tall, and the statue alone weighs 2,500 pounds. The gray granite background is 10 feet and weighs 16 tons. See the background in the picture on the left. Taft worked almost 2 years, actually 1 year, 11 months, to sculpt the statue. It was placed near Blanche's gravesite in Forest Mound Cemetery on October 11, 1923, a gift to the city of Waupun. It became listed in the National Register of Historic Places August 6, 1974. Thus, the beginning of an era in the city of sculptures. Blanche Bancroft Shaler was born June 26, 1868, and died November 1st, 1921. She grew up in the Waupun area on the Bancroft farm south of Waupun. Darius L. Bancroft was her father, and he was a member of the Wisconsin State Legislature. In the fall of 1894, she visited her family, who by then had moved to Santa Monica, California. She took this trip with Lillian Hooker, also from Waupun. Blanche and Lillian were members of the original club, a club of young women friends who did various social activities together. Blanche married Shaler in 1895. They were married 26 years, and their home was at 300 South Watertown Street. They have one child, Marion, who attended Vassar College. Marion then married Arthur Hanisch. Arthur Hanisch's father, Oscar, was the treasurer of the city of Waupun. He was the owner and operator of the commercial hotel across the street from Farmer's Elevator. He also was postmaster for a while. Marion's husband, Arthur Hanisch, was the founder of the Stewart Company of Waupun, and then after a merger became vice president and director of Atlas Chemical Industries Incorporated, headquartered in Wilmington, Delaware. They had a son and they named him Shaler Hanisch. Okay. January 1928, Marion Hanisch, daughter of Clarence and Blanche Shaler, was threatened in a blackmail plot. The heiress received a note demanding $1,000 ransom, or her husband Arthur would be killed and the beautiful Recording Angel statue would be blown up. I will read now from the ransom letter. It said, "You will give us $1,000 or we will take your man for a ride. We will watch you and him and have way of knowing. If you let anyone know, we will blow Big Stone and Cemetery into a pile of rocks to let you know we are wise. And then we raise the price to $10,000, which you be glad to pay." Marion disregarded the threat and immediately told the police what had happened. She insisted on paying the ransom, fearing for her husband's life and frightened that something would happen to her son Shaler too. She withdrew the $1,000 from the bank and insisted on taking the money herself to the drop location. Detectives from Milwaukee and the local police came up with a different and safer plan to trick the blackmailer. Decoy money was put into a suitcase and then carried by a detective dressed like Marion Hanisch. He went to the designated place, but no one showed up. The police, however, also guarded the $25,000, which was the value of the statue at that time of the Recording Angel Memorial Monument. The story does end well with no one killed, and the statue, as you know, is still erect in Forest Mound Cemetery. The blackmailer was never caught.
James Earl Fraser was an American sculptor, completing most of his works in the first half of the 20th century. Born in Winona, Minnesota, his mother was a descendant from the Pilgrims of Plymouth Rock. His father, an engineer, helped push the expansion of the railroad west. Fraser's father was also one of the few men tasked with recovering the remains of the 7th Cavalry after the Battle of Little Bighorn. As a child, Fraser lived in the frontier life and experienced firsthand the forced and sometimes brutal assimilation of the Native Americans. These memories were expressed through art with pieces like The Indian Princess, The Indian Head or Buffalo Nickel, and his most famous work, The End of the Trail. In 1894, at the age of 17, Fraser went to Paris to study at the Eco des Beaux Arts studio. He took along with him his first creation of The End of the Trail, an 18-inch sculpture which won him a first-place scholarship to study under the tutelage of Augustus St. Gaudens. After completing his studies, Fraser moved to New York City and at 24 opened his studio. Fraser met one of the men who would be the model for The End of the Trail while attending a Wild West show on Coney Island. When asked if he could create a large-scale sculpture of The End of the Trail for the 1915 Panama Pacific Expo, Fraser asked Seneca Chief Johnny Bigtree, to model for him, completing the 18-foot plaster sculpture in about 2 years. Isaac John, a Native American actor, Bigtree was a member of the Seneca Nation, best known for having posed for the famous Indian Head Nickel in James Earl Fraser's End of the Trail. Chief John Bigtree enjoyed a screen career lasting from 1915 to 1950. Chief Bigtree was a celebrated attendee at Waupun's 125th Jubilee, where he was greeted, shook hands, and posed for photos dressed in his full Native American regalia in front of the End of the Trail. Well, that didn't work. There we go. Fraser was invited to create a showpiece for the 1915 Panama Pacific International Expedition, which for the first time highlighted the arts instead of industry. His entry piece was a massive plaster sculpture named The End of the Trail, originally meant to be cast in bronze. The metal shortages during World War I prevented it. The original plaster sculpture has been restored and resides in the National Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Clarence Shaler was just one of the millions of people who attended the exposition. He said at the time I was winter living in Berkeley, California, and visited the expedition many times. Almost invariably, before leaving the grounds for the day, my footsteps would end up at the statue, The End of the Trail. I considered it the most artistic and beautiful of all the pieces at the fair. As the years went by, it was broadcast not only in pictures, but small bronzes such as bookends and so forth. However, on inquiry, he found that it had never been remodeled and cast in bronze. and the thought occurred to him that no piece of statuary was so typically American and would so well voice the feeling he had for the American Indian here in Wisconsin, where he made one of his last stands. When Shaler realized the end of the trail was never cast in bronze, he reached out to Fraser and paid for it to be cast in bronze, and bringing it by boxcar to Waupun in 1929. Here are a few examples that we have here at the museum of the reproductions of the end of the trail. After winning the first prize at the Panama Pacific Exposition, the end of the trail was reproduced countless times. Buttons, lapel pins, small bronze figures, toy banks, and even snow globes. And Fraser himself never saw a penny. The end of the trail is a reproduction bronze of James Earl Fraser's masterpiece. The statue originally mounted on a stone base, so it overlooked the Rock River. This is a gift of Clarence Shaler to his home city of Waupun. Depicting a horse and rider, drooped in great exhaustion at the end of the day, the statue epitomizes the American Indian crowded by the white man to the end of the trail at the Pacific Ocean. Unveiled in 1929 at a spot of great spiritual reverence, the end of the trail was placed poetically along the bank of the Rock River, where for centuries past, people of the First Nations had gathered to camp. In 1997, the statue underwent major restoration. Art conservator Tony Rahr and a team of UW-Madison students cleaned, x-rayed, and had a special lacquer applied to help keep the chocolate brown color. Repairs to the rock base, which had been slowly crumbling under the weight, proved difficult, and the rock base was replaced by cement foundation in the fall of 2005. The Doe and Fawn. Clarence Shaler was an avid golfer and founding member of what was then called the Rock River Country Club. The Shaler Company even manufactured golf clubs and balls from a period of time. He enjoyed golfing in the early morning and would often see a group of deer at the edge of the fairway along the tree line. His piece, Group of Deer, commonly known as the Doe and Fawn, was sculpted in Shaler's Pasadena studio. They were cast in bronze and mounted on a bronze base. The doe's head is stretched forward warily, while the fawn at her side is eager and interested, ears upright and one foot lifted. Doe and Fawn was gifted to the country club as a nod to one of Shaler's favorite memories there. Located at the entrance to the Rock River Country Club, the sculpture was originally dedicated June 9th of 1993. There was a benefit and wine tasting held of April 2006 at the country club, with all the proceeds to fund the restoration of the Doe and Fawn, and it was refurbished and rededicated September of 2006. Do we have any questions?
How would we know?
Hey, Tracy,
Yes.
is Clarence Shaler buried in Waupun?
Clarence is not buried?
I don't think so. That's a good question.
He is buried in Waupun.
I think
Yes, he is.
I think he
He's
is.
with Blanche.
I think he's with
Yeah,
Blanche.
yes, he
Yeah.
is with Blanche. But he passed away in California.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So he passed away in California, but they brought him back here for burial in Waupun at the Forest Mountain Cemetery.
Sure thing.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, thanks, Pat. Anybody else?
Thanks for the presentation.
Okay, we've got a stay tuned for part 2. Um, We will be going over the rest of the sculptures in part 2. The Citadel, Morning of Life, Abraham Lincoln, She Who Sows, Dawn of Day, the Pioneers, the phrase at the library. I don't know if many people know that there is a relief of some geese at the library that Fraser also sculpted. We have Diogenes and we have Genesis to go over in the next presentation. A big thank you to the Waupun Public Library for hosting this presentation, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Tracy and Jeannie, for presenting. That was great. Thanks everyone for joining us. This is a great turnout for being virtual. I know virtual is kind of awkward and we're all kind of like fumbling around half the time trying to figure out what we're doing. But the meeting rooms here at the library have been authorized to open April 4th, which at that point we're going to start taking reservations too. So I will connect with you, Tracy, and maybe we can see about when you would like to do part 2. I don't know if you want to do fall or sometimes summer isn't the greatest attended for programs we've experienced, but so we'll connect with you and then get, information out there when we have the part 2, and then that should be in person if people are comfortable doing that. So
That sounds wonderful.
yeah. So did anyone have any other questions at all? Otherwise, we will say good night, but maybe I'll
I
give
think
it.
I'm muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, Steve,
Okay,
I can hear you now.
right. Well, I can't attend personally because I'm 1,000 miles away.
Okay, yeah.
Are you going to be recording that one and having it available to see?
I'm trying to investigate options for also providing it virtually in some way. We have a webinar version of Zoom, which I have to play around with. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but we might be able to have it in person, but also provide it virtually. And then also then we could, if you couldn't make it at the time that we are actually presenting, the Historical Society has let us in the past record the programs and then put them on our website. So that's another option that you could watch it later. So
Sure.
Get everything figured out with this more technology, but yeah, we would really like to do something like that because there may be some people that like you that are 1,000 miles away that would like to see it, or other people that, might want to just stay home or whatever the case is. Vanessa, did you have a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for this great program. I am also far away, north of Chicago, and just happened upon your notice on Facebook and jumped in, and it's very informative. So thank you very much. My question for you is, I'm very interested in the Shalers and the information about that family and how he came to sculpting, because it's really not a simple kind of art that you just pick up one day. It's, large scale bronze sculpture is nothing to sneeze at in terms of a hobby. So I'm fascinated by him. And I wonder if there are book recommendations you have, if there are any books about this.
Yeah.
If you excuse me for a second, I can go across the room and grab a couple of them, and then you can see them, maybe write down the titles or whatnot.
That would be awesome. Thanks.
Give me a second.
Thank you very much for your expertise.
And actually, he started very late in life with his sculpturing. I think he was in his 70s, wasn't he? I think he was in his 70s.
Just one other question. You had that slide with various end of the trail pieces on it. Would you be interested in a picture? My sister-in-law was a baby when the Indian came to town for the 125th. And they have a picture with her and him in front of the statue.
Tracy, would the library be interested in a picture of Chief Big Tree at the 125th, or do we have that, or?
If you could send it in an email to the Waupun Historical Society at Gmail, we have an accessions committee that can actually take a look at it and see if it's been in our collections or not.
Mhm.
Okay, so to Vanessa, we've got, well, that's probably backwards, huh? It's by June Kelly, and it's called A Very Large Wizard of Oz.
It looks good.
A Very Large Wizard of Oz by June Kelly.
Yes, it's Clarence Addison Shaler. A Very Large Wizard of Oz by June Kelly.
Great.
We got some of the information for the program from that. And you can see it's not like a regular book. It's only like in kind of pamphlet form.
Got it.
So,
So I won't find it on Amazon is what you're telling me.
yeah, you probably won't.
Okay. I did think of another question. Does anybody know if Laredo Taft ever came to town?
Taft did come to town to look at the hill that he was going to be placing the recording angel on. And to decide if that was kind of the spot that it was going to be in.
Interesting.
Yeah, just once and really short-lived, as far as we know.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay, Pam, do you want to call it?
Sure, thanks, but thanks so much. Again, Tracy and Jeannie, that was great. I'm really impressed with the attendance. We haven't had this many at a prior virtual program, so that's great. And then, you know, we even have more when we are in person, so come out, and then, like I mentioned, we'll try to see what we can do about getting a virtual option as well when we do have an in-person program. So.
That sounds like a really great alternative.
So, right. So we'll see what we can do or play around. So, but thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.